Hi everybody, today I'm going to be doing a review of the Kershaw Decimus. This is Kershaw's version of the Hinderer Maximus. A very cool design, which is certainly the most important thing with this knife. If you're not a fan of it aesthetically, there's a lot of other knives out there, so you may as well just stop this review here. Also, if you're in the UK like me, assisted opening knives will soon be illegal here, so I definitely wouldn't be buying any. Once I finish the review of this and the review of this Kershaw Knockout, I will be hopefully rehoming my assisted opening knives to somewhere they can be legally owned. So yes, if you are in the UK, this or any other assisted opening knife is probably not a good choice for you anymore. So the blade length here is 3.25 inches. Here is a Ontario Rat Model 1 and a Kershaw Atmos. You can see that the overall length here is 7.5 inches, longer than an Atmos, smaller than our Ontario Rat Model 1. Bring out another two. Here is a Spyderco Paramilitary 2, very popular knife, and a Spyderco UK PK, which is a very popular knife in the UK. You can see that in terms of cutting edge length, it's just about on the same length as the Paramilitary 2, a hair shorter. Now the Kershaw Decimus here does weigh 4.34 ounces, which is a lot for a knife of this size and a knife with this kind of cutting edge length. We'll get more to that later. This knife is made by Kershaw. I've only had to use their warranty on one occasion so far, but on that occasion it was okay. Being in the UK, I had to go through a wholesaler. They took a very long time to deal with it, but eventually it got sorted out. So yes, this knife should have a decent warranty, especially if you are over in the States where they can give you support more easily. This is a speed safe knife, and that is what Kershaw call their assisted opening models. I have a whole video on how that works, so if you're interested in that, please go and have a look at that video after this one. But this knife here is an assisted opening knife, just the same as those, and it functions the same way. So I'm not going to talk about how that works or the kind of action from that in this video, because it's all in the other video there. The only difference I would say is that there's a little bit more pressure required on the flipper tab to get this knife to deploy than some of my other assisted opening knives, but it's very minor. The action overall is what I would expect from a Kershaw Speed Safe model. Now the Decimus is somewhere between a liner lock and a frame lock. If you don't know what I mean by that, this Ontario Rat Model 1 here is a liner lock. It has a complete handle scale, and then a liner which is bent over and contacts the blade tang. That's a liner lock. And here, this Hinderer XM18 is a frame lock. Nothing over the top, the frame of the knife itself bent in, contacting the blade tang. I would have to say the Decimus was somewhere between the two of them. It's either a thick liner lock with a funny shaped handle scale, or a thin frame lock with an overlay. I would probably swing more to the frame lock with an overlay. That's more how it feels. This lockup is completely fine though. It's at about 60-70%, which is a bit more than I'd like necessarily, but it's certainly secure enough and it's fine. Tiny bit of blade play, but certainly nothing to worry about. Now, since I've already mentioned the overlays, these overlays will also act as an over travel stop, meaning that I can't push this lock bar too far and bend it out this way. This overlay here will prevent that. There is very little in the way of lock bar access, and you can see that if I line the knife up nicely with the camera. You can see that there's no cutout really here to access the lock bar. If we compare that to something like the Kershaw Knockout, you can see that there's a large access here for me to get my thumb past and disengage that lock. To counter that, they have jimped this lock bar, and it's certainly very grippy jimping, but it's also very aggressive jimping. It is not particularly comfortable. I understand why they had to do it, to kind of preserve the lines of this knife, if you will, but it's not the most comfortable lock bar to unlock. This knife is essentially just made of steel. That's why it's on the heavier side for its weight. They have cut some pockets in the back here. I doubt that you'll see that. Oh, you can maybe see that a little bit on camera. There is a pocket cut into each side to remove some of the steel, but this still ends up being a very heavy knife. So steel frame, FRN or plastic scales, and the blade is 8CR13 MOV. None of those materials are particularly impressive, certainly not anymore. And this knife is in the same price bracket as a lot of, for example, CGRB stuff, which use usually G10 and D2. This one is G10 with a carbon fiber peel ply layer on top. But they use D2 blade steel, which is considered a better blade steel than 8CR13 MOV. It's slightly more prone to corrosion, but it has far longer edge retention, meaning most people would rather take a D2 blade than an 8CR13 MOV blade. It is a usable steel, but it's going to need sharpened quite frequently. The Decimus has what's called a bayonet style blade, which means that this edge at the top here is unsharpened. The Hinderer Maximus was available in a bayonet style blade very similar to this, or the double-edged dagger blade. Unlike the Maximus, however, the Decimus does not quite complete a full 180-degree blade rotation. You can see that there's a little bit of the blade sticking up here, and you can also see that the flipper tabs are not quite straight. This is slightly lower here as the blade has not fully rotated. They don't quite line up completely straight across the knife. That is not an issue as long as you're not planning on sharpening this top edge. I don't know why you would feel the need to. It should be more functional without the top edge being sharpened. But if you are planning on sharpening the top edge, please do not, because it would make the knife rather unsafe when it's closed. Functionally, the blade shape is fine. It certainly doesn't have very much belly, meaning it's not really very good for the likes of chopping board work. It does have quite a good tip though, making it quite good for piercing tasks. The grind is not particularly impressive either. It's not hugely thick blade stock, thank goodness, but it's a very shallow grind. That's a necessity, again, of the aesthetic they're going for here, because they can only grind from halfway down the blade to keep it mostly symmetrical, but it does make it fairly thick behind the edge, which means it isn't the most performance orientated blade. The finger choils here are not finger choils. They're just sharpening choils, very large sharpening choils. They are certainly too small for my fingers. So if you're looking at this knife and thinking, because you're a fan of a forward finger choil, that's not going to be the knife for you unless you have very, very small fingers. But again, I think they're necessary for the aesthetic here, so I'm not going to be as upset about that as I usually would when someone wastes some blade length to give a large choil which you still can't use as a finger choil. This blade is blackwashed, which is nice. I like blackwashed blades. My other blackwash, Kershaw, is a very nice blade as well. I'm a fan. I think they look very nice. They don't scratch up very well. Sorry, they don't scratch up very easily, and they don't mark very well with dirt and fingerprints or anything like that. The build quality of the Decimus is passable, but not much beyond passable. It's certainly not dangerous. I've got no fear of it falling apart when I'm using it, but there are other knives in the same price range that are feeling better made, like this CGRB Rampart, or to some extent even this Heine Haynes CRKT Pillar. They feel slightly better made than the Decimus does. Since this is an assisted opening knife and it's running on washers as well, you really shouldn't need to take this knife apart to clean it and keep it running well. However, it is surprisingly easy to take apart if you do need to. I will say though that you want to be quite careful with your screws. So usually on knives the clip screws are the same. This is not the case here. One of them goes into this standoff in the back. One of them only goes into the frame on one side. So these two screws are not interchangeable. And then once you take this handle scale off, there is another screw in here which goes into this second standoff, which is there. That is different yet again. So you just need to be careful that you're putting the screws that you took out back where you took them out when you reassemble the knife. Unfortunately, all of the screws on this knife, with the exception of the pivot, are T6. I'm not a fan of T6 screws. I kind of get why they did it here, because again, this is a design focused piece. The knife is fine in the pocket. It does have essentially a flipper tab on each side, which gives it a slightly awkward carry profile. But because it is so thin in this dimension, it's still going to feel thinner in the pocket than something like a PM2 or Kershaw Knockout, in fact. If we line up the flipper tab here with the flipper tab on the Knockout, you can't see the other flipper tab. Well, it's not a flipper tab, but you know what I mean. You can't see this piece here on the Kershaw Decimus because the Knockout is taller in the pocket. The Decimus, however, is really quite thick and fairly heavy. In fact, it's very, very almost as thick as a full thickness XM18. In fact, it feels more or less bang on the same thickness as a regular thickness Hinderer XM18, which is a thick knife. If we bring back in the Knockout, you can see it's way thicker than the Knockout. So it is quite chunky in the pocket, it's quite thick and fairly heavy. The pocket clip is quite good. It feels fine in the pocket, even though it lands on a textured area, it still goes in and out the pocket quite well. What bugs me about the pocket clip, however, is it's very, very similar to a Hinderer pocket clip, and the filler tab on this knife is very similar to a Hinderer filler tab as well, and yet they're not interchangeable. This is a Hinderer design. Hinderer designed this for Kershaw to make. Why Hinderer or Kershaw or whoever made that decision, why they decided to not make them compatible is frankly beyond me. I don't see any disadvantage to that whatsoever. But the pocket clip does work fine, and you do have the option for left side carry as well. Like I just said, it is a Hinderer design. Rick Hinderer is known to be a very, very good ergonomic designer. Oops. This knife is not quite as ergonomic as something like an XM18. As I'm sure you would be able to tell just from looking at them, this is going to be a more ergonomic shape than this. However, the Decimus is really surprisingly good ergonomically, and it's kind of left me feeling like Hinderer couldn't make something unergonomic if he tried. This not a flipper tab sticking up here, I don't know what you would call it, a blade guard, I guess. It acts as a good thumb ramp in the open position, and this knife's really pretty comfortable. I didn't get any real hot spots from it when I was using it. It felt really pretty good, and that is something I didn't expect. I was very impressed by that. Now, the Kershaw Decimus is a derivative of the Hinderer Maximus. Both knives have a similar aesthetic, and they both get their name from a famous gladiator called Maximus Decimus Meridius. As such, both are aiming for the gladiator style, and I think they both look great. However, asking some non-knife people about this knife, they said they thought it looked very aggressive and more like a weapon than a tool. So if you are interested in one, then you do need to be aware that some people might think this is a bit more aggressive than it needs to be. So in terms of a conclusion, we end up right back where we started. The materials and build quality here are just good enough that the design can be the deciding factor. If all you're looking for is a functional tool, you can do way better for your money. Something like a CGRB, the D2 blade, ceramic bearing, manual action, is, in my opinion anyway, a far better functional knife than this. Here's a QSP Parrot, which is only an £18 knife in the UK, and functionally, again, you're very similar. Cutting edge length, see that they're both pretty close, smaller, lighter package. Yeah, arguably slightly better blade steel as well. And if you particularly want a Kershaw, what about the Kershaw Atmos, which is a far smaller knife in terms of overall length, longer cutting edge, still ergonomic. It's a manual action knife on bearings. It's very smooth, and it's also cheaper and lighter, carries better. In my opinion, this is a far more functional tool, far better functional tool than this. More functional is maybe not quite fair, because they should both function more or less as well as each other. The Kershaw Atmos will certainly slice better, but this is going to be way easier to carry, way lighter in your pocket, that kind of thing. So at the end of the day, it's again all about the design. This is a design piece at some level. I really like it. I really do. It's different. It's not the same old thing all over again, like the QSP Parrot. Now, this is a very inexpensive knife. I can forgive it completely, but it is a very boring design. And the same with Ontario Rat Model 1. Very, very vanilla kind of knife designing. This is something a bit different, and it's cool. And yes, it's a bit more money than it really should be for the materials and to some extent for the build quality. But you're paying for the design, and you're paying for something that's a bit different and cool and interesting. And yeah, I don't really have a problem with it for the money. Yeah, I think that's it for today. If you are looking at it and you love it, you're probably going to love it. And if you're looking at it and you're not fussed, then buy something else, because there is certainly no shortage of options out there. For me, I am a fan. I really like this knife. It is, like I say, it's just interesting and different. And I'll be sad to see this one go, but that is the way of it, unfortunately. Thanks for watching. Bye.